Okay, so in this video we're going to make a simple tiling concrete texture using photo reference and using Photoshop, which is an old school technique, but it's pretty serviceable, pretty quick, and with the flexibility that you have in Unreal, you can do a fair bit with it without having to open Substance Designer or anything else like that up. I've had to narrate over the top of this because the audio died halfway through the original recording, so you'll have to bear with me on that one. But yeah, let's discover what I did together. So I'm going to create a new texture. I'm going to create a 2048 by 2048 texture, and I'm going to copy this into the so I'm using a lot of shortcuts here, so I'll be using Control A to select all, and Control C to copy, and Control V to paste, Control T to get access to transform tools, and then I can pull those things out, and I'm just trying to get it so that it meets the edge perfectly. I'm going to make a duplicate of that layer, so I'm just dragging that layer down to the layer icon at the bottom. I'm using Control T to flip it, to get transformed, so I can flip it, and then I can get my full resolution out of the texture. Now, if I'd done this way, the right way, I could have used the mask to mask out the edge, but I was being a bit hackier than that, and I was just erasing it. So, but you could mask it just as easily if you want a non-destructive way of doing it. I'm actually using a brush which has got a bit of an edge to it, and that's just to rough up the break between the two and make it not too soft, which works quite well for something like concrete, and gives us a very quick, dirty kind of blend between the two. It's fully my intention with this that this texture is gonna have a fair bit of range in it, more than we want ultimately. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up a certain way in Unreal that will give us some flexibility. So this detail is going to be dialed down ultimately, so it is deliberately a bit noisy. So another tool that I've used, which is not that obvious here, is if you look at the if you look here, I've got this new layer on top, which is the combination of these layers. This is basically, I've used a shortcut which is it will give you carpal tunnel syndrome trying to do it, but it's Control Shift Alt and E together. We'll basically take all the layers and collapse them into a new layer, and it will stick it on the top of the stack wherever you've clicked it. But it's a really handy thing to have where you want to kind of make a change to everything, but you don't kind of want to delete the things underneath, which is the case in this case. I want to keep this one and this one as they are, but I want to kind of work on the new one. The reason I'm doing that is because basically here I'm using the offset to make this tile by 1024. So this is a 2048 texture, and I want to tile it 1024 by 1024, so horizontal and vertical. And this will basically pull the edge from here to here and pull the edge from the bottom to the top, so I can actually see where the seam is. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and work that seam out by basically putting more copies of this original texture in and try and make it completely seamless. At least that's the plan. And you can see I'm just showing you here how it changes. So I set that to 1024, and that basically puts the seam right in the middle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically bring in another copy of the texture, the original texture. There you go. So I've just basically Control V to basically paste it in because it was already on the clipboard, and I'm just scaling it and making it fit across the horizontal seam. Now what I'm going to do is what I did before, which is basically fix the seams that it creates on the edges of the texture, and on the bit on the bottom as well. But what it'll do is it'll make this texture vertically seamless now. So all I need to do is do exactly the same thing again. So I'm going to make a copy, I'm going to paste in another copy, I'm going to turn that 90 degrees, and I'm going to scale it, and this will deal with the other seam that I've got. You can do similar things with brick patterns or anything you want. Obviously you would need to be a bit more careful with those. You need to work those things out, and you couldn't do this like rotating things 90 degrees so with things like that. But essentially you can, just using an offset trick, you can basically fix most seams that you would have in a seam, you know, in a texture that has seams in it. I'm just going to go back in. I quite like that little hole at the top, so I just went back in and undid it. And yeah, so that's kind of the core of what we've got. So what I just need to do now is do my old trick of Control Shift Alt and E to make a duplicate of the whole thing, which I'm doing there. I wasn't totally convinced that I'd done that right, so I'm on the very top layer and then Control Shift Alt and E, and it will basically make everything beneath it into one layer and create a new layer from it. So I'm doing my going to filter, offset again, and I'm just looking now for bits that have kind of slipped through, and I'm just going to use classic kind of clone. So I'm holding Alt, I've got my clone tool, holding Alt down and sampling an area, and then just basically painting it in where I think there might be an edge. I'm going to do my offset again and just see if there's anything else. And I think I'm reasonably happy with that. I just dropped in here to see if I could, needed to, if you use the shadows and highlights, what you can do is you can pull some of the lighting out of the texture. In the end I didn't do it because I felt like I was getting too much range, more than I needed, so I ended up not using it. But it is a handy tool to use if you are trying to get your shadows and your highlights. You kind of want an image that's fairly flat for your albedo. What I decided to do instead was just basically play with the levels and try and get something that gave me a fairly decent histogram, so everything's sort of in the middle. So that's what I went with instead, but the shadows and highlights tool is really useful. So I'm going to make a new host Photoshop file for this, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some folders so that I've got my albedo and my RMA texture and my normal map all in one master PSD file. This is something I quite like to do, just to make it so that they're easy to manage, and if anyone needs to come back to your file, they can kind of work with it. It works really well for Photoshop files. I tend to do it with my substance files as well, rather than using the RMA export. You can see here, I'll just stop this for a minute, I call this RGH. For the life of me, I don't know why I've called it that. It should be RMA. I change it towards the end of this video. I change it back to what it should be called, and I actually send this out as a roughness file as well. It isn't a roughness file. This folder is basically going to be my RMA folder, and I'm going to split the things out into the different channels. But for I had some kind of brain fart and decided that I was going to call it RGH for now. So yeah, that's just something to note. I do fix it in the end. This is something you can do with an action. You can actually set this up. I don't on this because I just wanted to show you it working, but you can have it as an action so that it just makes this every time you make a texture. And I would recommend, if you're going to do this, work this way. I would do it that way. So for my roughness, I wanted to use I was just going to use the albedo that I had, and I was just going to edit it. The way that if I'm doing these things in Photoshop, the way I tend to do them is I try to get a decent amount of range in the images, and then what I do is I will do a bit of work in Unreal to kind of fix them to how I want them to be. rather than relying them on like a proper PBR workflow that you would maybe get from Substance. If you look at this file, all I've more or less done is invert it, and then I've kind of played with the levels a bit to get more range in it. So that basically means I'm trying to get like more white and black into it. It's not that I'm going to use the roughness file like this so much, but it's when I take it into Unreal I can kind of edit it a bit more. The reason I inverted it was because I wanted the cavities, you know, the holes or the chipped holes that are in the albedo to be completely rough, so they needed to be white. So I did it that way around, and that meant that all those little pock marks and holes won't have any shininess, and then you'll just get these bits where it's like spilled on top or something like that, where it's going to be shinier. But as a starter, just to test things out, this should be fine. It's pretty much mostly in the mid-range, with some bits that could not really get any kind of roughness into them, and some bits which are always going to be shinier. And that's probably a good place to be, because I can edit that in Unreal using a lerp. So now I'm going to make a metalness channel and an AO channel. I'm just going to put them in an order that seems to make sense. So my metalness is just going to be black. So I'm just going to fill it with black, and I realised that wasn't quite black, which is not good. So I'm just going to fill it with black. So that's pretty straightforward. And then the AO channel, I'm going to have to generate, but I'm going to have to generate it from a normal map. And the first thing I'm going to have to do is generate a normal map, which I'm going to use Quixel suite for. I thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of show that some of the stuff that can do. I don't use Quixel for texturing, or like Dedo, which is the component that is the texturing part of it. I don't use that, but I do use Undo, which is the bit for generating normal maps and ambient occlusion maps and things like that, because it's really, really good. Okay, so this is Quixel Suite. When you open it up, you get this little dialog. You close that, and you basically get this set of tools here to use to make normal maps and PBR textures all within Photoshop, which sounds really good. I find that anything beyond the Undo part, like the bit for doing normal maps, is a bit sluggish and a bit slow, and I would rather use Substance Painter. But if you're in Photoshop doing this sort of stuff, Undo is really, really useful. So that's the bit that we're going to use. So if I click on Undo, you get this little box thing pops up, and that basically is everything you need to control Undo. And the bit we're going to use is we're just going to try and convert this texture map that we've got, this image, into a normal map, and it will give us some controllers to do that. And then we're going to use that normal map, and we're going to control it. We're going to turn it into an ambient occlusion map. So if we go to this little box here and click on this, we'll get the option to go for photo normal presets. So that's what we're going to use to basically generate our normal map. And it gives you a bunch of things you can pick from based on presets for the type of things you would want to make. So I believe the thing I go for is rough concrete in the end. In the case of this, it's important to make sure that you have it set to is tileable, which is there. Let me stop. Is tileable. So you select the thing that you want. So rough concrete is tileable, and then we're going to use the active document because that's the document we're looking at. And if we're happy for that, we'll click on that and then just let it do its thing. So it'll sit and basically make a load of new layers. It'll create a new document, and it takes a minute or two for it to do what it's doing. And that's it. It's created a normal map based on that. So what we have here is we have basically layers. So this is basically been built from different layers. So large, dense, large features, fine details, and super fine details. And what we can do is we can switch these on and off, and we can turn them up and down to get a better representation, or tweak it so we can get a representation of what we want. However, the first thing we probably want to do is get to see what this thing actually looks like in 3D. Luckily, Quixel has a tool for that, which is this. 3Do, and you can access that by, I think I'll show it in a minute, so I will, let's see if I do, by basically clicking this button here down at the bottom, and it will open up 3Do with our texture already made, and it'll stick it on a box for us. And there we go, we've got a representation of what that is probably going to look like on an object as a normal map. And it's a bit noisy for me, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch off every single one of these, and then I'm going to work them back up to get something I'm happy with. So I'm picking a side that's lit. I'm going to start with large dents, and as you can see, it's just showing us the large dents, and they're quite nice and quite useful because you get that kind of flatness with the bits being chipped away, but it's probably a little bit over the top. Large features is a bit grainy, and you can see I can dial it up and turn it up and down, and I just go through this and basically tweak these till I get something I'm happy with. So it looks like I'm happy with that. Do my old trick of the Control Shift Alt and E to get a normal map, then Control A to select it, and then into my normal map folder I'm going to Control V, and that will paste it in as my normal map. So I have a normal map. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to take this normal map and I'm going to go down to this map converter, and what that will do is it will give me some options on what I can do with the normal map. So if I click on this, then I've got some options, and the option I'm going to go for is AO. And what this will do is it will try and create an AO map from the normal map data. And again, it's tileable, and I'm going to use the active dock as before. And then it does the same thing. It'll go through this process. It'll make some new layers and in a new project or a new scene, and this is what we get. And it's the same as before, where we've got the option to pick different levels of detail, so large detail, medium and fine detail. To be honest, it's not the best example to show this off because essentially it's really granular, so there's not really going to be a lot of difference. And I fanny about in this for a bit trying to get something that looks better, but I mean, it kind of is what it is. But again, do the same trick, Control Shift Alt E, I use this a lot, and then I'm going to paste that into the AO slot. Just cleaning up a bit. So I'm going to sort these RMA channels out. So if I go into the blending options for the roughness channel, basically there's the opportunity to change to control what channel is actually affected. So you can see here it's got red, green and blue all affected. Essentially what we can do is we can switch off the channels we don't want the roughness to affect. So if we're building an RMA texture, if you remember how they work, the roughness is in the red channel, the metalness is in the green channel, and the AO is in the blue channel. So if we take the roughness and we switch off the green and blue, then we're essentially only affecting the red channel. And likewise with the metalness, we just tick the green one, and with the AO we tick the blue one. And essentially what we can do is we can build an RMA texture just within in that folder in Photoshop, which is really, really handy. So that's what I do next. So you can see me switching these channels off, which gives me a red channel. So everything's red. Go into the metalness and go to blending options and switch off red and blue, and then go into AO and my blending options and switch off red and green. Okay, and there we go, we've got an RMA texture in that folder that I'm still calling RGH at this point. So now we've got our albedo, our RMA and our normal map all in one PSD file. all in folders, easy to access, easy to find, and all we need to do is just export out from those. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to save the file first. So folder called textures, and within there I'm going to have a folder called concrete. So I'm just going to save these others out as PNGs. So my albedo folder is going out as PNG. Again, you can automate this as well if you want to. I don't even work it out here. I'm still calling it a roughness file. I don't know what I was thinking. I work it out when I make my normal map. Running on autopilot. Too busy chatting. I think this is where I realise. Yeah, I do. What an idiot. I'm thinking to myself, right, how do I fix this? Just save it, Dave, come on. Right, now, yeah, look at that. It's an RMA folder. What an idiot. Save as. Yeah, I'm not great for naming conventions. So yeah, so that's it really. That's it, pretty much ready to go. So the next stage is to take it into Unreal and set the material up in there so we can have a look at what it looks like.